I'm Clinton, 73. I lost my wife, Ruth, and the house we built became a burden.
My son's wife humiliated me with control, pressure, and treating me as disposable.
7 o'clock in the evening at the Kingston Avenue house signaled the beginning of a routine I'd observed for 2 years in a row. The sounds of cooking came from the kitchen as Kiara worked on dinner, occasionally clinking the dishes a little louder than necessary. I sat in my chair by the large window overlooking the courtyard, leafing through the evening paper, though the letters were blurring before my eyes. My wing of the house was on the east side and included a bedroom, a small living room, and a separate entrance. When we had built this house 30 years ago with the late Ruth, we had purposely planned for two wings. We thought children and grandchildren would live here someday. Ruth dreamed of a large family under one roof. She got what she dreamed of, she just didn't see it. Dustin appeared in my living room doorway without knocking, a right he'd retained since childhood. Tall, broad-shouldered, in an expensive suit, but with the face of a man who'd been solving other people's problems all day and was tired of it. His hair was slightly disheveled, his tie loosened. He leaned against the door jamb and stared at me in silence. "What's up, Dad?" "The usual." Reading the news, thinking about the past, waiting for dinner. Dustin walked into the room and sank down on the couch across from my chair. His movements were stiff, as if he'd rehearsed this conversation on the way home and still hadn't decided on the text. I put the paper aside and looked at my son carefully. In 42 years, his face had matured, masculine, but now there was something childlike about it, the same confusion he'd had as a teenager, when he didn't know how to tell me about a broken window or a bad grade. "Work okay?" I asked, even though I knew his construction company was thriving. "Yeah, everything's good. Got a new contract for an apartment complex in East Providence. Big project." "That's great." We didn't talk for a while. It was getting dark outside the window, and the yellow light from the street lamps was streaming into the room, creating a cozy atmosphere. Somewhere in the back of the house, we could hear Kiara's footsteps. She was walking between the kitchen and the dining room, setting the table. Usually by this time she called us for dinner, but tonight she was slow. "How's Kiara doing?" I asked, though I could guess that she was the reason Dustin was sitting there looking like that. "She's fine. Her classes are going well, and her teachers are praising her. They say she has a talent for interior design." "I'm glad to hear that." Dustin rubbed his face with his palms and took a deep breath. I recognized the gestures. He'd been doing that since he was a boy, when he couldn't find the right words. At such times, Ruth usually came over to him, hugged him, and waited patiently for him to collect his thoughts. I didn't have her patience and gentleness, but I learned to wait. "Daddy, are you comfortable here?" The question came out of the blue, though I had a hunch the conversation would go in that direction. Over the past few months, Shara had grown increasingly cold with me, and Dustin had grown increasingly tense. The atmosphere in the house had changed imperceptibly but drastically. "Why do you ask?" "I'm just curious. I know it's a big house. Maybe you're the only one bored in this wing." "Dustin, I've lived here for 5 years since I buried your mother. Before you got married, we were pretty comfortable, just the two of us. What's changed?" The son looked away and stared at his hands. His wedding ring glinted in the light of the desk lamp. He twirled it on his finger, another childhood habit that manifested itself in moments of excitement. Nothing had changed. "I just thought maybe you'd like more independence, or socialization with peers." "Peers?" "Well, people your own age. There are good places in the city for older people, where they organize various activities, excursions." I looked at my son carefully. His cheeks were slightly flushed, and he was clearly uncomfortable. Dustin had never been a good liar, and it was obvious now that those words weren't his. Someone had put them into his head, and it wasn't hard to guess who. "A nursing home, huh?" "Not a nursing home, just, places where people have a more active social life." "Dustin, look at me." He looked up, and I saw a familiar expression in his eyes, the same one he'd had as a child when he was trying to hide a prank. "Ruth used to say that our son had the most honest face in the world, and that's why he could never cheat. Is that your idea?" "I'm just thinking about what's best for everyone." "For everyone or for Sierra?" Dustin flinched as if I'd punched him. He opened his mouth to say something, but that's when his wife's voice came from the kitchen. Dinner's ready. The voice was smooth, polite, but there was no warmth in it. In 2 years, I'd learned to recognize Sierra's intonations, to know what was behind them. She was annoyed now, though she was careful to hide it. Dustin rose from the couch with obvious relief. The conversation wasn't working out the way he'd planned, and the opportunity to interrupt had come in handy. Let's go to dinner, Dad. Sierra's been cooking your favorite dish. What was it? Rosemary roast chicken. I chuckled. Rosemary roast chicken was one of my favorites, but Ruth made it. Sierra was good at it, but she added too much spice and dried out the meat. I never commented on it, though. Why spoil the relationship over little things like that? We went into the dining room, which was in the center of the house between the two wings. The large oak table was set for 3, as usual. Kiara was already sitting in her seat and smiled at us as we entered. It was a beautiful but formal smile, the same kind of smile she gave to customers at the beauty parlor where she worked before she was married. Good evening, Clinton. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. It smells delicious. I hope you like it. I've been trying out a new recipe. Ciara was a beautiful woman, slim, well-groomed, with brown hair and expressive brown eyes. Dustin had met her 3 years ago at a business event and had literally lost his head. I liked her then too, smart, well-mannered, with a good sense of humor. But gradually I began to notice how she was studying the house, evaluating furniture and interior items, asking questions about the cost of repairs and utilities. We sat down at the table, and Kara began pouring the soup. Her movements were graceful, polished. She knew how to give the impression of a perfect hostess. Dustin looked at his wife with an adoration that hadn't diminished in 2 years of marriage. "How's school going?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "Very well. I'm presenting my living room design project this week. My professor says I have a chance of getting a scholarship for next semester." "That's great." Keen, yeah, although, to be honest, sometimes it's hard to focus on studying in such a big house. There are too many distractions. She said the words lightly, as if in between, but I caught the hidden meaning. Dustin tensed and glanced at me quickly. "What kind of distractions?" I asked. "Oh, nothing major. It's just that when you're planning an interior, you want to have complete control over the space, you know. And here you have to take into account different needs and habits." "I see." We ate in silence. The chicken was indeed dried out, but I chewed diligently and occasionally nodded approvingly. Shara talked about her classmates, her next assignment, her plans for the weekend. Dustin chimed in and smiled, but I could see he was still thinking about our recent conversation. "By the way, Clinton," Ciara suddenly turned to me, "I was talking to my neighbor, Mrs. Palmer. She was talking about the new senior center on Hope Street. It's got a really interesting program. Yoga, painting, field trips, and the people there are so active and cheerful." Dustin choked on his soup and started coughing. Shara jumped up with a napkin, but I could see that her concern was fake. "Sounds interesting," I replied calmly. "Yes, and you know what the best part is? You can live there on your own, in separate apartments, but you don't feel lonely. Can you imagine how many new acquaintances, new impressions?" "Ciara," Dustin started to say, but his wife interrupted him. "And there's medical care. At our age, it's so important to know that help is always there." I put my fork down and looked at my sister-in-law. She was smiling her professional smile at me, but her eyes remained cold. "At our age? Well, I mean, the age of people who are in their 70s. You know what I mean? I do. And you, Dustin, do you think I need health care too?" His son was painfully silent, twirling his napkin in his hands. Sierra continued to smile, but there was a steely note in her voice. "Dustin is just worried about you. We both are. This house is too big for one person, and something could happen. And we're at work, so we can't help." "I don't live alone. I live with my family." "Yes, of course you do," Sierra agreed quickly. "But still, you know, sometimes a young family needs space to grow, to plan for the future, and such a big house requires a lot of attention, care." She said the last words especially significantly, looking at me point blank. The meaning was clear. I had become a burden, a hindrance to their family happiness. 2 years ago, everything was different. I remembered that sunny September day when Dustin had brought Kara over to formally meet me. They had been dating for 6 months, but she had never been to our house. Dustin was as nervous as a schoolboy before an exam, adjusting his tie and asking several times if he looked okay. "Dad, you realize she's very important to me, don't you?" he said then, standing by the mirror in the hallway. "I do, and that's why I want to meet her." Kara was very different then. She walked into the house with a bouquet of white lilies, my favorite flowers, which Dustin had obviously told her about. She was wearing a simple blue dress and minimal makeup, which only emphasized her natural beauty. She smiled openly and warmly at me, without the strain I was feeling now. "Mr. Rivers, it's so nice to finally meet you. Dustin has told me so much about you." "Only good things, I hope," I joked, accepting the flowers. "I hope it's all good. He's very proud of you." Then I thought she seemed sincere. Kara looked at the house with interest, asking questions about the family history, admiring the pictures of Ruth on the mantel. When I talked about how my wife and I built the house, she listened attentively, nodding and asking pertinent questions. "Did you design the layout yourself?" she asked, studying the high ceilings and large windows. "Suri." Ruth was an architect by training, although she had never worked in the profession. She wanted the house to be bright and spacious so that each room had its own mood. She certainly succeeded. The atmosphere here is so special. At dinner, Sierra was charming and relaxed. She talked about her job at the beauty parlor, her dream of becoming a designer, how she had met Dustin at his client's corporate party. Her son looked at her with loving eyes and caught every word. "You know, Mr. Rivers, when Dustin told me about you two living together, I thought what a wonderful son he was. It's so rare these days to find a man who takes care of his parents." "Sakutudwari." "We take care of each other," I replied. "After Ruth died, it was hard for both of us, and we supported each other. It's a beautiful thing. Family is the most important thing in life." I believed those words then. Sierra seemed like a girl with the right values, kind and understanding. Dustin proposed to her a month after they met. The wedding was modest but beautiful. Sierra wanted to sign in the town hall and the banquet to be held at home, in our garden. She did the decorations herself, and she had taste, I must admit. The white roses, the lace tablecloths, the garlands of lights in the branches of the old oak tree, all looked exquisite and romantic. "What do you think, Mr. Rivers, about moving the tables closer to the house?" She consulted me on the day of the wedding, when the furniture was being installed. "I think it's perfect. It's the best view of the garden." "You're right. You have excellent taste." She was really happy that day. I saw the way she looked at Dustin, how happy she was at every little thing, how she thanked the guests for their congratulations. When it was time to cut the cake, she hugged me and whispered in my ear, "Thank you for welcoming me into the family. I will try to be a good daughter." The first months together were indeed harmonious. Kara got up early, cooked breakfast for all three of us, took interest in my plans for the day. In the evenings, we would gather in the living room, watching TV or playing cards. She often asked me to tell stories about Dustin as a child or about life with Ruth. "Was it true that Dustin broke the neighbor's window with a ball in 5th grade?" She laughed, snuggled up on the couch. "It's true. Ruth and I made him apologize and pay for the repairs out of his own pocket money." "How long had he been saving up?" 3 months. He brought in $5 every week, what he'd earned helping Mrs. Connor's neighbor walk her dog. Dustin would blush and cover his face with his hands, and Shara would laugh and kiss him on the cheek. In those moments, they seemed like the perfect couple, and our house seemed like a truly family nest. The changes began gradually and almost imperceptibly. At first, Kiara began to notice small flaws in my habits. I liked to read the newspaper at breakfast and sometimes rustle the pages. She used to ignore it, but about 6 months after the wedding, she began to comment delicately. "Clinton, could you read the news a little quieter? Because Dustin's still sleeping, and I don't want to wake him up." "Sure, sorry." Then she started making comments about my evening walks around the house. I suffer from a mild form of insomnia and often get up at night to drink water or just walk around the rooms. The old house creaks underfoot, and that must have been disturbing to the young married couple. "Maybe you should put rugs in the hallway or try some sleeping pills," she suggested at dinner one night. "I try to walk more quietly," I replied. "Oh, I'm not complaining. Just thinking of your comfort. A good night's sleep is so important at your age. The phrase "at your age" began to appear more and more often in her speech, first in the context of health and care, then as a justification for various restrictions and changes. "Clinton, are you sure you should be watching TV this late? At your age, it's better to go to bed early. Maybe you shouldn't go out to the garden so often in rainy weather. It's easy to catch a cold at your age. Do you think the stairs to the second floor are too steep? At your age, it could be dangerous." Dustin didn't notice these changes at first. He was absorbed with work, new projects, and plans for the future. Besides, Kiara was smart enough not to air his grievances in his presence. She would wait until we were alone before launching her delicate attacks. "You know, Clinton, sometimes I think about how hard it must be for you in this big house. All those empty rooms, all those memories. I'm comfortable here. Of course you are. But still, have you ever thought about finding somewhere more comfortable, where there's more socializing, more activity? Dustin works so much we're rarely home, and you spend so much time alone." This conversation was repeated in different variations every few weeks. Kiara was persistent but tactful. She never said outright leave, but always found a way to hint that my life could be better somewhere else. About a year after the wedding, conversations about renovations began. Shara had studied interior design and wanted to put what she had learned into practice. At first, it was about small changes. New curtains in the living room, a different arrangement of furniture in the dining room. I did not object, realizing that the young woman wanted to furnish the house to her own taste. But gradually, the plans became more and more ambitious. Shara wanted to tear down the wall between the kitchen and dining room to create an open space. Then she talked about remodeling the upstairs where Dustin's childhood rooms and Ruth's office were. "That space is so underutilized," she explained, unfolding plans and blueprints on the dining room table. "We could make it a large bedroom with a walk-in closet and an office for Dustin." "What about Ruth's things?" I asked. "Well, I guess it's probably time to get rid of them. It's been so many years and they're just gathering dust." That was the first time I felt real hostility on her part. Shara talked about my late wife's things as if they were old junk that was getting in the way of her design fantasies. "I'm not ready to get rid of them," I said firmly. "Of course I understand," she agreed quickly. "I just thought that maybe some things could be moved, like the basement or the attic." Dustin supported the idea of renovating, but when it came to his mother's rooms, he was hesitant. "Why don't we leave the upstairs as it is for now?" he suggested to his wife. "Let's concentrate on the first floor." "Okay," Kiara agreed, but I could see the irritation in her eyes. Since then, she'd talked more often about how hard it was to live in a house where there was no way to change anything. The innuendos have become more direct and the tone more cold. "You know, Clinton, sometimes I think this house is too big for all of us. Too much history, too many restrictions." "What kind of restrictions?" "Well, when you have multiple generations living in a house, you always have to compromise. Different needs, different ideas of comfort. And that's a bad thing?" It's not a bad thing, of course. It's just, complicated, especially for a young family who want to build their own future. By now, I realized that for Kiara, I'd become an obstacle to full control of Dustin's home and life. She dreamed of a nest of her own, where she could pursue her own plans without regard for the feelings and habits of her elderly father-in-law. The last few months had taken a definitive turn for the worse. Yara had stopped hiding her irritation, and the talk of a more suitable place to live had increased. Dustin felt the tension, but didn't know how to resolve it. He loved us both and didn't want to hurt anyone, but choosing between his wife and his father was unbearably difficult for him. It was a few more weeks after that dinner when Chera talked openly about the senior center for the first time. The atmosphere in the house became increasingly tense, although we all tried to maintain a semblance of normal family relations. Dustin came home from work later than usual, and when he was home, he avoided long conversations and went quickly to his room. Kira became emphatically polite to me, but it was as cold as ice. In the evenings, I often heard their muffled voices from their wing of the house. The walls in old houses are thin, and sounds carry better than one would like. At first, I did not listen to these conversations, thinking it wrong to eavesdrop on private conversations between my son and his wife. But when one day I heard my name spoken in Sierra's harsh whisper, I couldn't help myself. "I can't live like this anymore, Dustin. He's always here, everywhere. I can't relax in my own home. Kiara, please don't start that again. This is my father's house. This is our house. Or am I wrong and we're just tenants? You know we're not. I just don't understand what it is that you're so annoyed about. Dad stays out of our business, lives in his own wing, keeps to himself. It's not about how he acts. It's that I don't feel like I own this house. Everything here reminds me of the past. Your mother's pictures, her things, her room layout. And he sits here like a living reminder that I'm a stranger. Shara's voice shook with restrained emotion. I realized the problem was deeper than just wanting to get rid of her father-in-law. She wanted to rewrite the history of this house, to make it hers alone. You're not a stranger, Dustin said quietly. You're my wife, and this house is yours now too. Then why can't I change anything here? Why is it that every time I suggest a change, you find reasons to refuse? All because of him, because of his feelings, his memories. Shara, be fair. We've redecorated our bedroom. We've remodeled our bathroom. Little things, I'm talking about real changes. I want to live in a house that reflects us, our family, our future, not a museum of the past. Their voices died down, and I thought the conversation was over. But a few minutes later, Sierra spoke again, and now there was a cold determination in her tone. Dustin, I'm serious. Either something is changing, or I don't know how much longer I can take it. What do you mean? What I mean is, I married you, not your father. I want to live with my husband, not feel like a third wheel in a house where the major decisions are made with an old man in mind. Dad never influenced our decisions. No, he hasn't. Every time we discuss plans, you think about how it will affect him. When we wanted to go on vacation for 3 weeks, you worried he'd be lonely. When I suggested throwing a New Year's Eve party for your business associates, you said Dad would be noisy. He's a constant presence in our lives. Dustin was silent for a long time, and I imagined him sitting on the bed with his arms around his head, the way he used to do as a child when he didn't know how to solve a difficult problem. What do you suggest? He finally asked. You know what I'm suggesting. We've already discussed it. There are wonderful places where people his age live full lives, socialize, do interesting things. He'd be better off there himself. Chiara, he's 73 years old. This house is his life, his memories. I can't just kick my own father out. Nobody's talking about kicking him out. We're talking about finding a solution that works for everyone. Think about our future, the kids we're going to have. They're going to need space. They're going to need attention. And I'm going to need my husband's help and support, not having to consider the needs of another family member. The mention of children was a clever move. I knew Dustin dreamed of having a big family, and Yara had a knack for using that against me. I understand how you feel, Dustin said after a long pause, but I'm not ready to make that decision yet. Give me time to think about it. How much time? We've been married for 2 years, and all this time I've been patiently waiting for things to change on their own. But it's only getting worse. Your father's becoming more and more attached to this house, and I'm feeling more and more like a stranger. A few months, we'll find a solution by spring. By spring? Dustin, it's January. Please, Kiara, this is a very difficult decision for me. Their voices died down again, and this time completely. I quietly made my way to my bedroom and lay awake for a long time, thinking about what I had heard. For the first time in 2 years, I realized that the situation had reached an impasse. Kiara wasn't going to back down, and Dustin was torn between his love for his wife and his sense of duty to me. The next few days passed in agonizing anticipation. Dustin walked around gloomily, and Yara was ostentatiously cheerful, as if their nighttime conversation had never happened. She cooked elaborate dinners, told funny stories from school, made plans for the weekend. But I could see her watching her husband, studying his reactions, looking for signs that he was ready to accept her terms. A week passed, then another. Dustin became increasingly withdrawn, often staying late at work and coming home when we were already asleep. Kiara was beginning to lose her patience. Her smiles became strained and her remarks more pointed. Clinton, did you remember to take your medication? She asked me at breakfast one day, even though she knew I only took vitamins. What kind of medication? Well, at your age, usually take something for blood pressure, for the heart. Maybe you should see a doctor. I just had a checkup. There's nothing wrong. Of course, it's just that sometimes I think you become more forgetful. Yesterday, for instance, you left the living room light on. I always turn off the lights. Tina, maybe you're just tired. It's natural at your age. She said it softly, almost affectionately, but every word was intended to emphasize my supposedly increasing infirmity. Dustin listened to this talk with a stone face, but said nothing. The climax came on a Saturday in late February. I woke up early and heard loud voices coming from their wing of the house. This time Shira wasn't trying to speak in a whisper. She was screaming. I can't wait any longer. You promised to make a decision by spring, but nothing has changed. He's still here, and I still feel like a stranger in my own home. Shira, please calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. 2 years, Dustin. 2 years I've been trying to adjust, to be understanding, to be patient. But there's a limit to my patience. Amarna, what do you want me to do? Kick my father out on the street? I want you to finally choose between him and me. I'm your wife, and I have the right to live in my own house without a stranger. He's not an outsider. He's my father. Then let him live like a father, as a guest on holidays, not as a permanent resident who interferes with our family life. Interferes? What exactly does he interfere with? Everything. I can't walk around the house in my bathrobe because I might meet him in the hallway. I can't turn up the music because I'm afraid of disturbing him. I can't rearrange the furniture or change anything in the common rooms because he might not like it. I feel like a guest in my own home. These are all things that can be discussed and resolved. No, you can't, because the root of the problem is not the furniture or the music. The root of the problem is that there's a man living here who thinks he owns this house more than I do. And you're letting him think that? Kara's voice trailed off into a shriek. I'd never heard her scream like that before. Always reserved and in control of herself. Now she had completely lost her temper. You have to choose, Dustin. Tonight. Right now. Either he leaves this house, or I do. Don't put me in the position of having to make that choice. I already have. And if you can't make it, then you've already made it. Then your father is more important than your wife. There was a long pause. I lay in bed with my eyes closed and my heart racing. Shira had given me an ultimatum, and now everything depended on Dustin's answer. Kiara, my son finally spoke, his voice as tired as if he'd aged several years in those minutes. Or, give me a little more time. This is not a decision that can be made in haste. How much time? Until summer? Next year? Until I go crazy with this situation? A month. Give me a month and I'll figure it out. A month, Kira repeated, her voice metallic. Okay, a month. But that's the deadline, Dustin. After that, I don't intend to discuss the subject any further. Their voices died down, and I heard the slamming of doors. One of them came out of the house. Probably Ciara, because her car engine started a few minutes later. I got out of bed and went to the window. Ciara was indeed driving away, her red sedan disappearing around the corner. She must have gone to her mother's house or to her friends' houses to vent and get some support for what she was saying. Dustin stayed home, and I knew he was sitting somewhere in his wing, mulling over the ultimatum he'd received. My son has never liked to make quick decisions, especially ones that could hurt someone. But now he had no choice. Any decision would hurt one of the most important people in his life. I realized that I had put Dustin in an impossible position. By my presence in the house, I was destroying his marriage, forcing him to choose between his father and his wife. It wasn't fair to him. As much as I loved this house, as much as I cherished the memories associated with it, my son's happiness was more important. We never spoke that day. Dustin left the house right after his wife left and didn't return until late that night. Chera arrived even later, and I could hear them talking quietly in their bedroom. Reconciling or making plans, I didn't know. But I did know another thing. The month Kiara gave me would be the last month of my life in this house. Because despite all my feelings and affections, I couldn't let my only son's marriage crumble because of me. The month flew by like one agonizing week. March in Providence was cold and rainy, which only added to the dreary atmosphere in the house. Dustin walked around as if condemned to execution, and Shira displayed an ostentatious calm that was worse than any scandal. She stopped cooking dinners, ate separately in their wing of the house, and greeted me as politely as if I were a neighbor she didn't know. I realized that time was running out, and I began to discreetly prepare for the move. I studied the advertisements for apartments for the elderly, made inquiries about the very centers that Kiera had so persistently advertised. Most of the places looked decent, but my soul refused to accept the thought of leaving the house I'd built with Ruth. I sat in the living room for long periods of time each evening, looking at the pictures on the mantel, going through the little things that reminded me of the years I'd lived here. Ruth's old books with her notes in the margins, her favorite morning coffee cup that I couldn't bring myself to put away, Dustin's childhood drawings that we'd saved in a scrapbook. All of these things would either have to be left behind or boxed up and taken to a small apartment somewhere on the outskirts of town. Dustin avoided talking to me and his wife. He left for work early in the morning and returned late at night, and spent his weekends in the office, citing urgent projects. I could see how hard this decision was for him, and my heart clenched with pity for my son. A man at 42 shouldn't have to choose between his father and his wife. Shara, meanwhile, pretended that nothing much was going on. She studied, went out with her friends, went shopping. Occasionally I heard her on the phone in the garden, discussing plans for a house renovation with someone in design. Obviously, she no longer doubted the outcome of the situation and was preparing for the moment when she would gain full control of the house. The decisive day came on Saturday, March 29th. I remembered the date because it was on that day 30 years ago that Ruth and I moved into our new home, a bitter irony of fate. In the morning, I got up earlier than usual and went to the kitchen to make coffee. The house was unusually quiet. No water running in the shower, no footsteps in the hallway, no muffled voices. It seemed like Dustin and Ciara were still asleep, even though it was almost 9 in the morning. I stood at the kitchen window, sipping my coffee slowly and watching the neighbor's cat who was hunting birds in our garden. Ruth had adored this red-haired brat and always left a saucer of milk on the porch for him. After her death, I continued the tradition, and the cat still considered our lot his territory. "Good morning, Clinton." I turned around. Standing in the kitchen doorway was Kiera in a white robe, cup in hand. Her hair was braided, and her face looked younger and softer without makeup. If it weren't for the cold glint in her eyes, you'd think she was the same friendly girl Dustin had brought to meet 2.5 years ago. "Good morning. How are you?" "Fine, thanks." She walked over to the coffee maker and poured herself a cup of coffee. "Such a beautiful morning, isn't it?" I looked out the window. The sky was overcast, drizzling with light rain, the wind swaying the bare branches of the trees. Just an ordinary, gloomy March day. "It's rather cloudy," I remarked. "Yeah, seems sunny to me." Shara smiled, that professional smile that always made me wary. "You know, Clinton, today is a day for change. New beginnings." "I see. Have you ever thought about making a change in your life?" We stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island, holding cups of coffee, and I realized that Sierra had decided to take things to the extreme. The month she'd given Dustin had expired, and still no decision had been made. Or rather, it hadn't been voiced out loud. "I thought about it," I answered honestly. "And what conclusion did you come to?" "That change is inevitable." "How wise of you." Shara's voice became steely. "You know, sometimes people cling to the past so tightly that they don't realize they're interfering with the future. It's possible. Young people need room to grow, to start their own families. And older people need— What do older people need, Clinton?" "Peace, I guess." "That's right. Peace. And companionship with their peers. And a lack of responsibility." Kiara took a sip of coffee and looked at me carefully over the cup. Her brown eyes were as cold as ice. "You do realize that Dustin will never tell you the truth, right? He's too kind, too caring. He'll agonize, tear himself apart, but he'll never ask you to move out, even if it ruins his marriage. Ciara, that's why you have to make the decision on your own, as a mature, rational person who loves your son and wants him to be happy." At that moment, Dustin walked into the kitchen in a homemade tracksuit, his hair disheveled. He had clearly just woken up and looked exhausted. "What are you two talking about?" he asked, feeling the tension in the air. "About change," Sierra answered. "About the importance of making the right decisions at the right time." "Sierra, please don't." "Don't what? Tell the truth?" Your father himself realizes the situation is a dead end. Don't you, Clinton? I set the cup on the countertop and looked at my son. His face was pale, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He'd lost weight in the last month, and his suit was hanging on him like a sack. Dustin, we have to talk, I said. Yes, we should, Sierra said, and the sooner the better, because I can't live with this uncertainty anymore. Ma, what uncertainty? Dustin walked over to the coffee maker, trying not to look at me or my wife. You know exactly what I'm talking about. A month ago, you promised to make a decision. A month has passed. I need more time. There is no more time. Sierra's voice rose and the polite mask slid off her face. I'm tired of waiting, tired of living in a house where I don't feel like a mistress, tired of my husband not being able to put his family first. Daddy's family too. No, I'm your family. I'm your wife, and he is the past getting in the way of our future. Dustin turned to Kiara, and I saw anger in his eyes for the first time in months. How can you say that? Because it's the truth. Why is your father living in our house? Throw him out. The words sounded like a slap in the face. Kiara screamed, her face contorted with rage and her hands trembling. The mask of the well-mannered, understanding wife had finally fallen away, revealing the true face of a woman used to getting what she wanted. There was dead silence. Dustin stood there with his mouth open, unable to believe what he was hearing, and I realized that the moment of truth had arrived. Okay, I said quietly. I understood. I turned and headed out of the kitchen. Behind me, I could hear Kiara continuing to yell at Dustin, demanding an immediate solution, threatening to go to his mother's house if he didn't comply right away. In my room, I pulled an old suitcase out of the closet, the same one Ruth and I had taken on our honeymoon 45 years ago. I began to put things away slowly, methodically. A few sets of clothes, toiletries, the most necessary medications. Ruth's picture from the bedside table. The book of poetry she'd given me for our first wedding anniversary. The voices from the kitchen grew louder and louder. Sierra wouldn't calm down, and Dustin tried to keep her quiet. I heard bits and pieces of phrases. Right away. Today. Not another day. Closing my suitcase, I grabbed my jacket and headed for the exit. Dustin caught up with me in the hallway. Dad, what are you doing? What I should have done a month ago. Amen. Don't go, please. We'll talk this through. We'll find a solution. There is a solution, son. Dustin grabbed my hand, and I saw tears in his eyes. It's not the solution I want, but it's the only solution that won't destroy your marriage. There was the clink of breaking glass from the kitchen, and then Ciara's voice. If he doesn't leave tonight, I will. I hugged my son and headed for the door. Ciara caught up with me in the hallway. Her face was red with anger, her hair disheveled. Finally, she exclaimed. Finally, someone in this house had some sense. I opened the door and stepped through. Ciara followed me. And don't come back in a week with tearful pleas. This decision is final. She grabbed a ceramic vase of flowers from the porch and threw it at me. The vase shattered on the driveway, showering my shoes with shards and soil. At that moment, Dustin came running out of the house. When he saw the broken vase and his wife with crazy eyes, he stopped dead. What have you done? He yelled at Kiara so loudly that even the neighbors looked out of their windows. I've never heard my son scream like that. I've never seen him so angry. Ciara backed away from him, clearly not expecting such a reaction. Dustin, how dare you? How dare you throw a vase at my father? He's leaving on his own. I didn't kick him out. You made it so he had to leave. And now you're humiliating him on his own doorstep. Dustin grabbed Ciara by the shoulders and shook her. She stared at him wide-eyed, not understanding what was going on. Her husband, the malleable, mild-mannered Dustin who never raised his voice, had turned into a furious man. You crossed the line, he continued to shout. My father is the dearest person to me after you. And if you can't realize that, then you're the problem, not him. Kiara began to cry, quietly at first, then louder and louder. But Dustin paid no attention to her tears. I'ma go inside, he ordered her in a tone I'd never heard from him before. We'll talk again. Sarah, sobbing, ran into the house. Dustin turned to me. Dad, come home. Dustin. Come home, he said again. Right now. For the first time in 2 months, my son sounded determined. And for the first time in 2 months, I saw him as a grown man who knew what he wanted, instead of a boy who was torn between two fires. We walked back to the house in silence. Dustin helped me carry my suitcase back to my room, and he walked to his wing, where Kira was locked in. I could hear their muffled voices. At first, she tried to explain something, to justify herself, but Dustin interrupted her with sharp, short phrases. The tone of the conversation was completely different from their earlier discussions, when their son had listened to his wife's complaints with gentleness and patience. I sat in my chair, trying to comprehend what had happened. In a matter of minutes, the entire family dynamic had changed dramatically. Dustin, who had been tiptoeing around the house for 2 years, afraid of upsetting his wife, had suddenly developed a temper I hadn't realized I had. And Sierra, always confident in her ability to control the situation, was at a complete loss. The voices in the next wing died down, and soon I heard Dustin's footsteps down the hall. He knocked on my door and entered without waiting for an answer. His face was grim, but determined. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you," he said, sinking down onto the couch across from my chair. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." "I'm listening." Dustin rubbed his face with his hands, an old habit that came out in moments of great excitement. "Kiara doesn't know one thing, or rather, didn't know until today." He raised his eyes and looked at me. "Her mother's apartment is in your name." I blinked, not immediately understanding the meaning of what he said. "What do you mean?" "When I bought this apartment 2 years ago, I put it in your name. Officially, you own the 2-bedroom apartment in Cranston that I gave to my mother-in-law." "Dustin, why didn't you tell me about this?" "Because I didn't want to drag you into the family problems. And because I didn't think they would." He grinned bitterly. How naive I was. His son stood up and walked across the room, putting his hands behind his back. His movements showed the intense energy of a man who had been holding back for a long time and had finally allowed himself to act. "You see, Dad, I'm not stupid, even though Kira might think I am. When we started dating, I noticed her looking at the house, my car, asking questions about my income. At first, I thought it was the natural curiosity of a woman who wants to know about the financial stability of a potential husband. And what made you suspicious? Too many questions too soon. After a month of dating, she already knew how much I made, what my bank accounts were, who inherited my business. And when she found out my mom died and I was the sole beneficiary, she became even more interested." Dustin stopped at the window and looked out into the yard, where the shards of the broken vase still lay. So when her mother started complaining about rent problems, and Kiera asked me to help, I decided to hedge my bets. I bought an apartment, but I put it in your name. If anything goes wrong in our marriage, my mother-in-law won't be able to claim the property in the divorce. Were you planning on getting a divorce back then? No, of course not. I loved Ciara. I wanted a happy family with her. But business taught me to always think about the risks. He turned to me. Turns out you did. There were sounds coming from their wing. Ciara walking through the rooms, slamming cabinet doors, searching or gathering something. Dustin listened and nodded. She was packing. She's about to come out and announce that she's going to her mother's until I come to my senses. He grinned without joy. Standard move. She'd done it a couple times before when she wanted to get her way. And you always made concessions? Always. Because I loved her and didn't want her to leave. But today, Dustin shook his head. Today I realized that I didn't love her, but my illusion of her. We were silent for a moment. The sounds from the neighboring wing died down. Then we heard quick footsteps down the hallway. Yara walked past my door, heading for the exit. Dustin didn't even move. You're not following her? I asked. No, let her go. She needs time to think things over. The front door slammed, and a minute later, Kiara's car engine started. Dustin went to the window and watched the red sedan pull out of the gate. Now for the best part, he said, pulling out his cell phone. Sierra thinks she's going to go to her mom's and wait for me to come crawling back with apologies and promises to make it up to her. But I'm going to surprise her. What kind of surprise? Dustin dialed a number and put the phone to his ear. Hello, Donna. It's Dustin. Yeah, it's okay. Listen, I have something important to tell you about the apartment. He stepped back to the window and I could only hear bits and pieces of the conversation. I won't pay anymore. The owner has the right 30 days to vacate the premises. The conversation went on for about 10 minutes. The voice of Donna, Sierra's mother, was getting louder. Even from a distance, you could hear her indignation and demand for an explanation. Dustin answered calmly, businesslike, as if he were discussing the terms of a construction contract, not the eviction of an elderly woman from her apartment. Donna, I realize this is sudden, but the situation has changed, he said. You have a month to find another place to live. If you need help moving, I can pay for movers. He disconnected the phone and turned to me. Done. In half an hour, Shara would find out that her mother had to move out of the apartment. In another hour, she'll know why. What about her tuition? Cut off the funding, called the college while you were unpacking your suitcase. Dustin sat back down on the couch and leaned back. You know, Dad, for the first time in 2 years, I feel free. I looked at my son carefully. Indeed, the tension I had seen in his face for the past few months was gone. He looked tired but determined. What's next? Succumb. Then we'll see how Ciara behaves. If she's willing to apologize for her behavior today and reconsider her attitude toward you, we can try to keep the family together. If not, he shrugged. Then no. Dustin, don't ruin your marriage for me. Dad, he leaned forward and looked me in the eyes. I'm not ruining the marriage. I just stopped letting my wife ruin it. There's a difference. We sat in silence, each thinking about our own things. I was thinking about how quickly relationships between people can change, how thin the line between love and calculation can be. Dustin was probably thinking about the future, about the decisions he had to make. About an hour later, Dustin's cell phone rang. He looked at the screen and showed me, Ciara. Faster than I expected, he said and answered the phone. Yes, I'm listening. Even without putting the phone close to my ear, I could hear Ciara's hysterical screams. She was screaming something about being mean, about how he had no right to cheat on her, about how it was illegal. Dustin listened silently for a few minutes, then interrupted her tirade. Ciara, calm down. I didn't deceive you. I just didn't feel it was necessary to go into the details of my financial decisions. A new wave of screaming. Now Ciara was accusing him of deliberately trapping her, of planning all this from the beginning, of never loving her. That's not true and you know it, Dustin replied calmly. I loved you and I was willing to give you everything, but not at the expense of humiliating my father. What about Mom? Ciara's voice came from the speaker. You're throwing an old woman out on the street. Your mother has a month to find a place to live, and I'm willing to help her move. That's more than generous under the circumstances. What circumstances? The fact that you threw a vase at my father and demanded he be kicked out of his own home. Those are the circumstances. Ciara was silent for a few seconds, then spoke more softly but no less angrily. Dustin, you're making a huge mistake. I'm your wife, and we can talk things out. Find a compromise. We've been compromising for 2 years. You saw the result this morning. I was upset. I said some things I shouldn't have said. You threw a vase at a 73-year-old man who treated you like a daughter. That's not overreacting, Ciara. Okay, I apologize. Come home and we'll talk about this. I'm home. You decide if you're ready to apologize to Dad and change your behavior, or if you'd rather live apart. And if I choose the latter, then in a month your mom's looking for a new apartment. Your schooling stops and you file for divorce. Or you don't file, whichever you prefer. But you're not coming back to this house. Dustin unplugged his phone and muted it. Ciara was obviously calling back because the screen kept lighting up with her name. But my son ignored the calls. Tough, I remarked. Necessary, Dustin replied. Sonana, Dad, I spent 2 years trying to find a middle ground between you and her. The result is this morning. There will be no more compromises. He stood up and headed for the exit. I'm going to go make us some lunch. Ciara usually cooked, but I think we can manage on our own. I sat in the chair for a long time, trying to make sense of what had happened. In the morning, I was going to leave this house for good, so as not to ruin my son's marriage. And now Dustin had jeopardized that marriage himself by protecting me. I didn't know if he was doing the right thing, but for the first time in 2 years, I felt at home in my own house. Dinner was held in an amazing atmosphere of calm that hadn't been present in our home in months. Dustin had prepared a simple meal, fried eggs and bacon, toast, fresh coffee. But we ate with gusto, as if we were relieved of a heavy load. My son talked about a new project his company had gotten in Newport. I shared plans for spring pruning of the trees in the garden. Ordinary, everyday topics that seemed impossible in the presence of Kiera with her constant tension and frustration. Dustin's phone rang every 10 to 15 minutes. First it was Kiera, then her mother Donna started calling. Dustin put it on silent mode and continued eating as if nothing was happening. Only occasionally he glanced at the screen and shook his head. "Persistent," I said, as the phone lit up once again with an incoming call. "They're used to me always answering the phone and rushing to solve their problems," Dustin said, sipping his coffee. "It's time to break that habit." After lunch, we went our separate ways. Dustin locked himself in his home office with his laptop, working on some drawings, and I went out into the garden. The March air was fresh and damp from the morning rain, smelling of waking earth and first buds. I cleaned up the shards of the broken vase, swept the porch, inspected the rose bushes that Ruth had planted 20 years ago. Working in the garden always calmed me. My hands were drawn to the earth, to the plants that demanded care and responded with growth and blooms. Here, among the trees and flower beds, time flowed differently, not frantically and anxiously, as it had been in the house for the last few months, but measuredly and naturally. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I heard the sound of a car. Turning around, I saw Shara's familiar red sedan slowly pulling into the yard. The car stopped at the porch, but Sierra was in no hurry to get out. She was sitting behind the wheel, talking on the phone, gesturing vigorously with her free hand, probably consulting with a friend or her mother about how best to proceed. I continued to work, pretending not to notice her presence. Finally, the car door slammed shut, and I heard the sound of heels on the walkway. Shara wasn't heading for the front door, but toward me, into the garden. "Clinton, I need to talk to you," she said, stopping a few steps away from me. I straightened up and turned around. Ciara looked different than she had this morning. Her hair was neatly styled, her makeup was refreshed, and she was wearing a nice beige coat and high boots. But her eyes were red from crying, with smeared mascara that she was trying to cover up with powder. "Yes," I said, taking off my gardening gloves. "I wanted to... I mean..." Kira stammered, as if her rehearsed speech had suddenly slipped into oblivion. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior this morning. It was wrong of me. Yes, it was. I was upset. I said some things I shouldn't have said. Throwing that vase at you was awful. I don't know what came over me." Sierra spoke softly, her eyes downcast. There was remorse in her voice, but I sensed it was a tactical move, rather than genuine regret. "Kiara," I said calmly, "I accept your apology, but the broken vase isn't the problem." "I know," she nodded quickly. "The problem is that things between us have gotten complicated. But we can fix it, can't we? We can, if you really want us to." "Of course I do. We're family." Kira looked up and looked at me hopefully. "Did Dustin tell you about, Mom's apartment?" "He did. There's some kind of misunderstanding. He can't just throw an old woman out on the street. I'm sure you can help us sort it out." "This is it." Kira didn't come to apologize, she came to negotiate. She was hoping she could convince me to sway Dustin to reverse his decisions. "Kira, I will not interfere with you and Dustin. It's your marriage, your problem. But you don't want us to get divorced, do you?" There's a tearful note in her voice. "Dustin loves you very much, and your opinion is important to him. One word from you and everything would be fine. One word from you could make things better too. 2 years ago..." Ciara flinched as if I'd hit her. The mask of repentance began to slip from her face. "Hey, Maiden, what do you mean?" "That the trouble in your marriage didn't start this morning. They didn't start because of me. They started when you decided you could change this house and this family to suit your needs. I never wanted to change anything. I just wanted to feel at home. Feeling at home isn't the same as demanding that everyone who bothers you be removed from the house." Shara bit her lip and looked away. We were silent for a few seconds, and I could see her struggling internally, trying to decide whether to continue playing the part of the remorseful daughter-in-law or to show her true colors. "All right," she said at last. "Let's say I was wrong. Let's say I was too hasty with the changes. But it can be fixed, can it? Can we live peacefully like we used to? Like before? I questioned. You mean like the first few months after the wedding? When you were researching the house and planning how to get rid of me? Sierra's face flushed. I never planned to get rid of you. Then how do you explain the constant hints that I would be better off in a nursing home? The remarks about my age and infirmity? Trying to convince Dustin that I was interfering with your marital happiness? I really thought you might be more interesting among your peers. No, Sierra, you were thinking about taking full control of the house and your husband, and I was an obstacle to that. She opened her mouth to object, but that's when Dustin came out of the house. He walked silently toward us, putting his hands in the pockets of his jeans. He had a calm but impenetrable expression on his face. How's it going? He asked, looking at his wife. We're talking, Sierra replied, trying to smile. I apologized to Clinton for my behavior this morning. And what did he say? That he accepts my apology, she said quickly. Dustin, we need to have a serious talk about our marriage, about the future. We will, but first, answer one question honestly. Dustin paused. Masha, do you really want to keep your family together? Or are you just trying to avoid the unpleasant consequences of your actions? Sierra blinked, clearly not expecting such bluntness. Of course I want to keep my family together. It's not like I'm some kind of... I love you. And Dad? What about Dad? Can you live with him in the same house without constant complaints and attempts to get him out? Kiara cast a quick glance at me, then looked at her husband again. Yes, of course. If we set some boundaries, rules for living together? What kind of rules? Dustin asked calmly. Well, for example, Kiara hesitated, realizing she was walking into a trap. Maybe the separation of shared spaces by time, or separate dinners on weekdays? So you want to turn our house into a communal apartment? No, I just think that some organization would be nice. Kira, Dustin interrupted her. Dad's lived in this house for 30 years. For the last 5 years, we've lived together without any rules or boundaries, and there's been no problems. The problems started when you came along, and the solution isn't to restrict Dad. It's for you to change the way you treat him. Okay, Kira said after a pause. Okay, I'm ready to work on the relationship. But what about Mom? You can't leave her homeless, can you? I can and I will if you don't change your behavior drastically. And my tuition? Same thing. Sierra looked at him wide-eyed, as if only now she realized that Dustin was serious, that her usual manipulations, tears, insults, threats to leave, were no longer working. You're putting me in an impossible position, she whispered. No, Dustin replied. You put yourself in an impossible position when you decided that you could choose which of my family deserved to live in my home. I'm just showing you the consequences of that decision. Kiara began to cry. For real this time, it seemed. Tears streamed down her cheeks, smearing the remnants of her makeup. She looked young and defenseless, and for a second I felt sorry for her, but only for a second. Dustin, please, she sobbed. Xiaonom, I'll make it up to you, I promise. But don't punish my mom for my mistakes. She's 70 years old. She has heart problems. Dad's 73, Dustin replied dryly, and you threw a vase at him. It was in a fit of anger, a rage that had been building up for 2 years. Dustin turned to me. Dad, do you mind if Kiara and I continue this conversation alone? Sure, I answered. I'm in the garden. I took the rake and walked to the far end of the plot, where I couldn't hear their voices, but I could see them standing near the porch. Ciara sobbing and gesturing, Dustin listening with a stone face. The conversation went on for about 20 minutes. Several times Ciara tried to hug her husband, but he gently but firmly pulled away. Finally, Dustin said something to her, pointed to the house, and Ciara nodded. She walked through the house, and Dustin came over to me. How did the conversation go? I asked. She agreed to my terms. A formal apology to you, a change in behavior, no more talk of you moving out. Dustin sighed. In exchange, I restore funding for her education and give her mother another chance to stay in the apartment. And do you believe she'll change? No, the son answered honestly, but I'm willing to give her an opportunity. If she really tries, maybe our marriage can still be saved. And if not, he shrugged, then at least I'll know I've tried everything. We went back to the house where Kara was sitting on the couch in the living room, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. When she saw me, she stood up and came closer. Clinton, I want to apologize again for everything, for my behavior, for my words, for this morning's scene. Her voice was shaky, but she sounded sincere. I was wrong, and I realized that. Thank you, Sierra. I accept your apology. I want you to know that I'm ready to change my attitude. We're a family, and we're supposed to support each other, not do what I did. I nodded, but didn't say anything. Sierra's words sounded right, but I saw calculation in her eyes, not remorse. She'd agreed to Dustin's terms, not because she'd realized her mistakes, but because she'd realized she had no choice. That was enough for now, but I had no illusions about how long that truce would last. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange semblance of family idyll. Sierra did her best to be the model daughter-in-law, cooking dinner for all three of us, taking an interest in my affairs, helping with the gardening. But underneath that ostentatious care was tension, ready to erupt at any moment. I could see the way she pressed her lips together when I turned on the TV in the living room, the way she crinkled her nose when she heard my footsteps in the hallway late at night, the way she stared dreamily at Ruth's pictures as if planning where to put them. Dustin has changed too. The gentleness and willingness to compromise that I'd always considered his flaws had been replaced by a hard determination. He watched his wife's behavior carefully, noting her every gesture, every intonation. When Sierra tried to discreetly criticize my habits or hint at the inconvenience of cohabitation, Dustin immediately put a stop to it. "Kiara, Daddy has a right to read the paper at breakfast," he said one morning when she asked me for the third time to keep it down. "I don't mind reading," she replied with a strained smile. "It's just that the newspaper pages rustle so loudly." "Then close the bedroom door or put on headphones." Sierra's face flushed, but she remained silent. Before, Dustin would surely have found a compromise suggesting I read in another room or buy a tablet for the news. Now he was putting my needs above her whims, and it was dramatically changing the family dynamic. Sierra's first serious attempt to regain control came on Sunday when we were watching an old movie on TV. I had chosen the classic movie channel, a 50s movie starring Cary Grant that Ruth loved. Kiara sat silent at first, flipping through a magazine, but then she sighed and fidgeted on the couch. "Why don't we switch to something more contemporary?" she suggested. "These old movies are so slow." "No," Dustin answered briefly, keeping his eyes on the screen. "But there's a great comedy on the other channel right now. I've read the reviews and it has such funny scenes. Shara, Dad picked out a movie. We'll watch the rest of it." "I'm not saying it's a bad movie," she said quickly. "I just thought it would be more interesting for everyone." "I'm interested," I said. "And Dustin too, apparently." Ciara looked at both of us with ill-concealed irritation, but didn't say anything. Half an hour later, however, she got up and announced that she had a headache and went to her room. From there soon came the sound of the TV on. Obviously, she was watching her comedy in the bedroom. "You would have changed the channel before," I remarked when it was just the two of us. "I used to think a happy marriage was all about constant concessions," Dustin replied. "Turns out some people take concessions for granted and demand more and more." We finished the movie in silence, and I thought about how quickly a person can change when they realize their kindness is being abused. Dustin had finally learned to say no, but the price of that lesson was too high. Kara's next attempt was more subtle. She decided to take advantage of her mother's upcoming birthday and have a family dinner. Of course, the celebration was to be held at our house, and Ciara began making plans with the enthusiasm of a general preparing a military operation. "I thought I'd invite my mother's sister Nora and her husband, my neighbor Mrs. Palmer, maybe a couple of my mother's friends from book club," she said over dinner, listing the guests on her fingers. 12 people in all. No more." "That's a lot for our dining room," Dustin said. "Ah, no, they'll fit. But Clinton, we'll have to extend the table and rearrange the living room furniture to make more room." I realized what she was getting at. Rearranging the furniture meant taking Ruth's pictures off the mantel, taking some of the memorabilia off the shelves, turning the living room into an impersonal reception space. "No one's going to touch the furniture," Dustin said before I could answer. "But what about the guests? They need a place to sit." We'll rent extra chairs or limit the guest list. Dustin, it's my mother's birthday. I can't not invite the people closest to her. Then rent a restaurant. Shara opened her mouth, then closed it and stared at her husband in bewilderment. A restaurant, but it's customary to celebrate family holidays at home. In normal families, yes. But we have an abnormal situation where every occasion can become a reason to rearrange the furniture and change the usual order. I didn't want to change anything drastically. I just wanted to move things around a bit. No, Kiara, we're not moving anything. Either celebrate with the space you have or find another place. Ciara's face turned red, her eyes filled with tears. She tried to call upon her feminine weapons of fragility and defenselessness. Dustin, I've worked so hard to organize a good holiday for Mom, and you act like I'm asking for something unreasonable. Can't you just make the house more welcoming for one night? The house is already hospitable. It's not him that's the problem. It's you using any excuse to make the changes you want to make. That's not true. Yes, it is. Last week you suggested temporarily removing the pictures of Mom in the bedroom because they create a sad mood. The day before that, you wanted to replace my mom's set with a more modern one because the old one looks archaic. And today I need to rearrange the furniture for the party. See the pattern? Shara was silent, but it was clear from the look on her face that Dustin's arguments had hit the mark. She was really using every excuse to gradually change the look of the house, to erase the traces of the past. All right, she said in a cold tone. Then we'll celebrate at the restaurant, since my attempts to make my family feel good are being met with such understanding. That's a good idea, Dustin agreed. Make a reservation. Shara got up from the table without finishing her dinner and went to her room. Half an hour later, she heard a phone call from their wing, complaining to someone about her husband's impossible behavior and the humiliation she has to endure. Isn't that a little harsh? I asked Dustin when it was just the two of us. Maybe, he replied. But if I gave in now, tomorrow she'd find 10 more reasons to make small changes. And the day after that, she'll demand that I take your stuff out of the living room because it doesn't fit in. He was right, and I understood that. But the atmosphere in the house was getting heavier and heavier. Shara was no longer trying to play submissive. She was emphatically polite, but cold. She cooked only for herself and her husband, forgetting to set the table for me, cleaned only their part of the house, ignoring the common areas, watched TV in the bedroom, avoiding evenings together in the living room. Dustin returned the favor. He stopped taking an interest in her affairs, didn't ask about her plans for the day, didn't suggest weekend trips together. In the evenings, he worked in his office or spent time with me, discussing the news or playing chess. They lived like neighbors in a communal apartment, polite but aloof. The climax came a month later, at the end of April. I was sitting in the garden in the evening, enjoying the warm spring air and the fragrance of the blossoming trees. Muffled voices came from the house. Dustin and Ciara were talking in the living room. Quietly at first, then louder and louder. I can't live like this anymore, I heard Kiara's voice. You've turned into a completely different person. I've become what I should have been a long time ago, Dustin replied. A man who protects his family, not betrays them for the peace of the house. Your family is me, your wife. My family is you and Dad. But you want me to choose. Okay, I choose. So what? I'm supposed to spend my life with an old man interfering with our plans? Dad's not interfering with anything. It's your attitude towards him that's in the way. He's interfering with me, his presence, his habits, his say in all family matters. He doesn't have a say. You and I make all the decisions. But I won't let you humiliate him. Then our marriage is doomed, Kiara said in a tone that should have sounded tragic, but sounded more like a threat. Maybe, Dustin replied calmly, unless you're ready to accept my family as a whole. There was a long pause. I got up from the garden bench and headed toward the house. I didn't want to overhear the rest of the conversation, but as I passed the living room window, I saw Ciara standing in the middle of the room with her arms folded across her chest and Dustin sitting in a chair, staring at the floor. Okay, she said finally. I understand. You've made your choice. Yes, Dustin answered, lifting his head. I did. Ciara nodded and left the living room. Half an hour later, I heard sounds in their wing. She was packing. Dustin sat in his chair until late at night, not turning on the light, not moving. As I walked past the living room getting ready for bed, he looked like a man who had made a hard but right decision. The next morning, Ciara left for her mother's house with a large suitcase and a promise to think about our relationship. But it was clear from the look on her face that she wasn't going to think about the relationship, but how to make the most of the divorce. For the first time in 3 years, there was silence in the house. Not tense, heavy, but calm and natural. Dustin walked around sad, but not depressed. He was free from having to maneuver between my wife and me, and that sense of freedom outweighed the pain of separation. "Do you regret it?" I asked him at dinner when we were alone at the big table. Regret what? About marrying her? Or for letting her poison our lives for so long? About not being able to save the marriage? Dustin was silent for a long time, slowly chewing his salad. "You know, Dad, I used to think love was the willingness to sacrifice everything for someone. Turns out that true love is refusing to sacrifice those you love too. Ciara wanted me to sacrifice you for her, but if I did, I would no longer be the person she supposedly loved me for. And now what? Now we move on. You and me and the memory of Mom. Just like as it should be." That evening, we sat in the garden for a long time, listening to the birds singing and enjoying the peace. For the first time in months, I felt at home in my own house. The first days after Ciara's departure were a strange mixture of relief and anxious anticipation. It was as if the house breathed freely. Gone was the constant wariness, the need to weigh every word and action. Dustin worked late, but it was productive work, not an attempt to avoid domestic conflict. In the evenings, we gathered in the living room again, watching the news, discussing plans for the weekend. "You know, Dad," Dustin said Wednesday night, putting the newspaper aside, "I'd forgotten what it was like to come home and not stress, not guessing what mood the wife is in, what she's going to complain about today. Marriage shouldn't be a source of constant stress," I replied, adjusting the cushion on my chair. "I thought all families lived like that it was normal to compromise, to give in, to avoid conflict at all costs." "Compromise, yes, but not surrender." Dustin nodded and picked up the paper again, but I could see that he wasn't reading, but thinking about something else. It was as if he'd gotten a few years younger in those 3 days, his face calmer, the deep creases between his eyebrows that had appeared in the last months of their marriage gone. Ciara called every day, but Dustin didn't always answer. When he did, the conversations were short and businesslike. She demanded explanations. He calmly stated his position. No emotion, no attempt at reconciliation on his part. It was as if he was on autopilot, waiting for Ciara to make up her own mind about her plans. Thursday morning, while I was watering the flowers on the porch, an unfamiliar black sedan pulled up to the house. An elderly woman with disheveled hair and tearful eyes got out. Donna, Ciara's mother. I'd only seen her a few times, at a wedding and a couple times during family dinners. A woman in her 70s, once beautiful, but now looking tired and lost. "Clinton?" she called tentatively as she approached the porch. "Is Dustin home?" "He is." "Come on in, Donna." She walked up the steps, and I could see her hands were shaking. She was wearing a crumpled blouse, a stained skirt, shoes of varying heel heights, as if she'd dressed in the dark or in a great hurry. "I need to talk to him," she said, tears in her voice. "About the apartment. He can't do that to an old woman." I walked her into the living room and called out to Dustin. He came down the stairs slowly, unenthusiastically, obviously expecting this visit, and preparing himself for an unpleasant conversation. "Hello, Donna," he said politely but without warmth. "Come in, sit down." "Dustin, my boy," Donna began, her voice trembling. "What's going on? Ciara came in crying, saying you'd had a fight with her. And yesterday I got an eviction letter. They're giving me a month to vacate the apartment." "Yes, that's right. But why? What did I do wrong? I've always paid my utilities, kept my apartment in order, never broken any rules." "Donna, you didn't do anything. This isn't about you." "Then what is it?" She took a handkerchief out of her purse and wiped her eyes. "Ciara said the apartment wasn't in my name. It was in Clinton. Is that true?" Dustin glanced at me and I nodded. "Don't hide it. It's true. When I bought the apartment, I put it in my father's name. But why? It was a gift for me. A gift is still a gift no matter whose name the property is registered in. I just wanted to protect myself in case of divorce. Donna blinked as if she didn't understand. Divorce? But you just got married. Kira said you were happy. We were happy for a while, but your daughter decided she could change the rules of the game and choose which of my family deserved to live in the house. She just wanted to feel like the boss, at the expense of humiliating my father. Donna looked at me with a puzzled expression, as if for the first time she was wondering about my role in this conflict. Clinton, you can't throw me out on the street, can you? I'm 70 years old. I have a pension of $500 a month. Where am I going to find a place to live for that kind of money? I felt a pang of pity. Donna really was the innocent victim in this situation. Her daughter had behaved abominably, but Donna herself had never been disrespectful or hostile to me. Donna, I said gently, I'm not the one making the decision. The apartment is technically in my name, but Dustin handles all financial matters. Dustin, please, she turned to him pleadingly. Hannah, I understand that you and Shira had a fight, but that's no reason to punish me. I've done nothing wrong to you. Not you personally, but your daughter threw a vase at my 73-year-old father and demanded that he be thrown out of his home. After that, I don't feel obligated to support your family. She threw a vase at Clinton? Donna looked at me in horror. Shira didn't say that. She doesn't tell me a lot of things, Dustin said dryly, like the fact that she's spent the last 2 years systematically humiliating Dad and demanding that he move into a nursing home. No way, Kira is a good girl. She wouldn't hurt anyone. Donna, your good girl made life in that home a living hell, and now she's reaping the consequences of her own behavior. Donna cried, quietly, hopelessly. She seemed to age as she realized the magnitude of what was happening. What do we do now? She whispered. Where do I go? Do you have any relatives? I asked. I have a sister in New Hampshire, but she lives in a nursing home. Can't take in. And a niece in California, but we haven't spoken in 10 years. And Kira? She's working. She can get you a room somewhere? Donna grinned bitterly. Shara is broke. Dustin paid her tuition, supported both of us. She even got her driver's license recently. Dustin paid for the course. Now she's telling me I have to find a way to get by on my own. Dustin cringed when he heard that. Apparently his wife's irresponsibility was hurting him even now. Look, Donna, he said after a pause, you have 2 choices. Either Ciara apologizes to Dad for what she's done and promises to change her behavior. Then we can try to rebuild the family. Or she continues to play the resentful princess. Then you're looking for another place to live in a month. And if she apologizes, Donna asked hopefully, then I'll continue to pay for the apartment and her tuition. But the first time she disrespects Daddy, it'll stop for good. I'll talk to her. I'll explain to her that we need to apologize. Make things right. You can talk all you want, but it's her decision to make, not out of fear of being left without money, but out of realizing she was wrong. Donna nodded and stood up hurriedly. I'll go to her right now. I'll explain everything. She headed for the door, then turned to me. Clinton, I'm sorry about my daughter. She's young. She's stupid. She doesn't know what she's doing. Donna, she's 37 years old. At that age, stupidity is no longer excused by immaturity. When she left, Dustin and I sat in silence for a long time. I thought about how one bad decision could ruin the lives of several people. Shara had jeopardized not only her own marriage, but her mother's as well. I feel sorry for the old woman, Dustin said. It's not her fault her daughter grew up selfish. Will you give Kiara another chance? If she really changes, yes. But I don't believe in miracles anymore. It's been 3 days. Kiara hasn't called, hasn't come, hasn't tried to contact. Donna hadn't said a word either. Dustin worked with double the energy, as if trying to drown out the thoughts of his crumbling marriage. I gardened, read, cooked simple lunches for the 2 of us. Monday morning, while we were eating breakfast, the house phone rang. Dustin answered, listened to something, then handed the receiver to me. It's for you, Dad. Donna. Clinton? The voice sounded tired and hopeless. It's Donna. I wanted to say, Sierra and I have decided not to apologize. Oh, I see. She says that Dustin's changed, that he's become violent, that there's no point in having a marriage like this. Donna's been quiet. She's filing for divorce this week. I'm sorry to hear that. And I'm moving in with my niece in Oakland. The bus is the day after tomorrow. Her voice is shaky. Thank you for all the good times. And I'm sorry for all the bad things my daughter did. She hung up. Dustin looked at me in anticipation. Kiara's filing for divorce, I announced. And Donna's going to California. I see. Dustin finished his coffee and got up from the table. So you decided not to apologize. Kiara thinks you're the one who's changed for the worse. Maybe I have, he shrugged. I used to let people wipe their feet on me. Now I don't. If it's a change for the worse, so be it. Dustin left for work and I was alone in the big house. For the first time in 3 years, I could walk around it freely without fear of running into my sister-in-law's disgruntled face. I could read the newspaper at breakfast, listen to music in the evening, leave the living room light on as long as I wanted. But that freedom was bitter. Dustin had lost his wife. I had lost hope for grandchildren, for the continuation of the family lineage in this house. Kiara could be a good daughter-in-law and mother if she could accept the simple truth that family is not a territory to conquer, but a space to love. In the evening, Dustin and I sat in the garden, enjoying the warm May air. The apple trees that Ruth had planted were blooming, smelling of lilacs and daffodils. The house looked beautiful in the setting sunlight, big, cozy, full of memories and hopes. You know, Dad, Dustin said, looking at the lighted windows, maybe it was meant to be this way. Maybe this house is just for you and me. What about the continuation of the family? Grandchildren? If God wills it, I'll meet someone else. Someone who will love not only me, but my family as well. Until then, we live as we have lived. You, me, and the memory of Mom. We sat in the garden until late at night, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant noise of the city. The house was quiet and peaceful, finally free from the hostility of others. Reconciliation was not in sight, but it was no longer needed. We had found the peace we had lost 3 years ago when a woman with a beautiful face and a cold heart came into our family. The story ended the way it should have, the triumph of family over selfishness, love over calculation, loyalty over betrayal. Kiara got what she wanted, freedom from the extra father-in-law. But that freedom came with the loss of everything she had, and we stayed home, where we belonged.